Last season, the Michigan Wolverines captured the national championship and achieved a 15-0 record, being only one of 5 teams since the start of the college football playoff era back in 2014 to go undefeated and to win it all. I'm sorry, UCF, you're not included in this club. But entering 2024, of course, there's expected to be some type of drop-off. After all, Michigan only returns 1 starter on the offensive side of the ball. They return less than half of their starters on the defensive side of the ball, and they only return 40% of their 2023 production. And since Michigan went 15-0 and they won the national championship, and they were one of the more dominant teams, not just in the college football playoff era, but in college football history, really the only direction they can logically go is down, especially when you factor in all the coaching changes that have occurred. And coaching, along with development, along with continuity, experience, recruiting, all of that goes into the mixture, into the cake that you're trying to bake. And Michigan, I'm in lockstep with everyone here. They're going to take a step back. But I think right now they are becoming more underrated by the day. Their win total per FanDuel just moved down to 8.5, which means the majority of people, more so the majority of odds makers in Vegas, think that Michigan is going to go 8-4 or 9-3, and those are their most likely outcomes. And I am here to tell you that I respectfully disagree with that. I think Michigan will be elite or near elite this season, and I am trending toward the former. And that's because of a variety of reasons. I think they have a good culture. I think Jim Harbaugh left the program in a good place with a good system, and they have a plethora of talent returning. And when you develop at a high level, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State are examples of this. Yes, they've recruited higher than Michigan, but many programs have recruited better than Michigan, and they haven't had the consistent success that those 3 have had. The constant in those 3 programs' success is their coaching, development, and system. And I think Michigan has a system and has a level of coaching and development that is much closer to those 3 schools than perhaps most want to admit, or at least think, because maybe some of them truly don't believe that. But I think they'll be proven wrong on that front this season. Before we dive into this video and I tell you why this team is underrated, and also why this team can be good. There's evidence of teams that have this low amount of returning production, that have some type of staff turnover that's massive, that have succeeded the following year. In fact, some of them have even gotten better after all those radical changes. Before I show you all those things, please like this video, please subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new college football content. Subscribing is mostly not just for this channel's sake and helping this channel produce more content and reach 20,000 subscribers, where I will be doing a giveaway, potentially for College Football 25. But liking the video helps tremendously as well, because it gets us into the algorithm, gets the channel more attention, more viewership, and helps us to earn more subscribers. And regardless of what my giveaway at 20,000 subscribers is, if any one of my videos reaches 1,000 likes, I will be doing a giveaway for 1 or 2 College Football 25 video games. It's just that simple. So I know that this video, along with others, whether it's for Michigan, Ohio State, Nebraska, Michigan State, some of the bigger fan bases that I cover, if you can get this entire fan base, Michigan in this instance, to like this video and get us to 1,000, you'll have an early giveaway on top of the 20,000 subscriber giveaway. And also comment your thoughts down below. But let's dive right in. So we have to start off in 2023. There's really no other choice. This team went 15-0 and won it all last year. And part of, I would say, my opinion that Michigan won't immediately fall off, or that they'll remain at a near elite to elite level, is the fact that they were one of the better teams in college football last year. And even with all that they lost, they still return aspects of this team. They return a lot of 2D players. They even return some key starters who made impact plays, a plethora of impact plays. They were number one in every power ranking. They were the unanimous number one team last season, and they had 13 players drafted. And again, even more players went off to the NFL if you look at undrafted free agents. Michigan was 5-0 against the top 25. They were 3-0 versus the top 4. And if you look at end of season rankings, they were 3-0 versus the top 10. But I think Ohio State, in truth, was a top 4 team last year, regardless of what the AP and coaches poll said. That was one of the better teams in the country. Michigan beat them. They beat Alabama. They beat Washington. And they won against the top 25 by an average of 28.2 to 14.4 points, so an average by 2 touchdowns. And against the top 4, they won still by double digits, by 2 scores, winning by an average of 30.3 to 19.0. Most of that is their dominant matchup and game performance against the Washington Huskies, who I thought, in a sense of dominance and talent, obviously wasn't the number 2 team in the country, but the way they systematically were able to break opponents and frustrate them and constantly out-scheme them. The ceiling of that Washington team was insane. When they were clicking, no one could stop them. And they were never able to click against Michigan because of how great they were on defense and even on offense with running the football. That Michigan offensive line, which all season looked inferior to the 2021 and 2022 units, it came alive in the postseason, in the playoff, where it mattered the most. And they looked way better than the 2022 and 2021 offensive line in the postseason, where they got gashed and gassed and really ran over by Georgia and TCU. Not this time, though. They were able to get pressure on Michael Penix. They were able to shut down Washington's passing game. Washington couldn't run the ball against Michigan. And J.J. McCarthy in the passing offense did not play to their ceiling, not even close against Washington, although they did have an underrated defense to their credit. But Michigan was able to run all over the Huskies. They ran for, I think, over 300 yards, if my memory serves me correctly. And finally, per S&P Plus, Michigan had the second best defense since 2005. Since ESPN's FPI, that's the cutoff date I'm using, because also per FPI, they had the fourth best defense since 2005. Last year's Michigan's defense was generationally talented. It was all-time good. It was up there with 2021 Georgia, with 2016 Alabama, with 2011 Alabama. It was better than 2011 LSU's. It was better than 2022 Georgia's defense. It was better, in fact, than 2019 Ohio State's defense. The 2019 Ohio State had a much better offense, at least in terms of how they produced on the field. Better ground game, better pass game, etc. Also, to shout at Ohio State, they had a similar defense to Michigan last year. So don't think Ohio State's defense or even Iowa's or even Penn State's are necessarily taking huge steps back in 2024. Their defenses were similar to Michigan's. They weren't at the exact same level, but they were just barely trailing behind. They were closely following Michigan's defense last year. And like Michigan's defense, at a bare minimum, entering 2024, they returned plenty of key pieces, especially Ohio State and Iowa, who returned the majority of their production and starters on defense. But this team was ridiculously good, and I just wanted to lay that foundation, because elite teams typically don't fall apart. I went back all the way to 1998. Only 14 of the 52 national championship game participants, because we're going back 24 years, have failed to win 10 or more games the following season. And a few of these teams, many of them of the 14 who failed, at least finished ranked. So in my opinion, looking at what Michigan returns, looking at history, looking at the system that Michigan has, the development they've received, Michigan's win total at 8-4, 9-3 is probably this team's floor. Like, they probably can't go worse than 8-4, 9-3, or at least it's very unlikely. Like 1999 Tennessee, because Tennessee won the national title in 1998, they went 9-3, finished top 10. Oregon in 2015, year after their national championship game appearance in 2014. They went 9-4, and they beat a top 10 Stanford, a 12-2 Stanford on the road with Christian McCaffrey. Tennessee in 1999 had some impressive wins as well. And there are other examples that I can bring up where teams, they failed, like I think 2001, Florida State is another example of this. Good team, not as great as the 1990s Bowden teams, but they had success that year still. They finished ranked and I think at least had a quality or some type of quality win squeezed in there. And you could go on and on and on. Even 2010, Texas, who went 5-7. 5-7. So actually, it's 3 teams who have a 500 record or worse, and not 2. I apologize on that error. Even Texas, who went 5-7, picked up a quality win when they beat Nebraska on the road, and that Nebraska team appeared in the Big 12 championship game. Washington could be in this category entering 2024. They lost even more than Michigan, and they don't have the same talent or base foundation pool that Michigan did, because Kalen DeBoer was only there for 2 years, and their staff and roster got gutted at an even greater proportion than Michigan's did. So 2020 LSU, 2023 TCU, 2010 Texas. Those are the only teams who, after the national championship game, had a 500 or worse record. Only 3. Only 3. Not 10, not even 5. 3. Michigan, I think, is an elite culture and conditioning, as I've already said, and they return key pieces like Donovan Edwards, like Colston Loveland, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore. They brought in Jayshawn Barham at linebacker, Josh Preby at offensive guard, Giovanni El-Hadi at the other guard position. He's played in multiple snaps. Michigan returns Will Johnson, Quentin Johnson, Makari Page. They return Tommy Doman. They brought in a great kicker, one of the better, more accurate kickers in college football, in Dominic Zvada. And at wide receiver, they bring back Tyler Morris and Samaj Morgan. And the receiver room's even a position of weakness, but all of these players that I've named have had some type of critical game experience, or they've had multiple hundreds of snap counts. So this team still has some cohesiveness, and the culture and the system that Jim Harbaugh left, I think, will take time to wear off. Before we dive deeper into this topic, though, and I close us out, I want to give a shout out to my Patreon page. If you want bonus content, sign up as an All-American or Heisman member for $10 or $25 a month. The bonus for the Heisman membership is after 6 months of Heisman membership, you get free College Football with Sam merchandise that is signed by me and shipped right to you. And you can get anything from the College Football with Sam merchandise of your choosing. For bonus content, there is not much coming out right now, but there will be in the next month or two, definitely, for the regular season. I'm still figuring all of this stuff out. I'm still testing things out. After all, this is the preseason. This is the time to test things, to change things, as when the regular season hits, we're not going to have the time to adjust to that. But if you want bonus content, which will come soon at some point, or if you want to get College Football with Sam merchandise, sign up as an All-American, or for the merchandise, Heisman membership. Or if you just want your name to be featured twice in the video with a shout out by name at the end, sign up as an all-conference member for just $5 a month. And also, check out my merchandise store. You can find the links to both my Patreon and merchandise store via the links in the description or down below in a pinned comment or in a reply to the pinned comment. I like to change things up depending on the video. It's very comfortable, and the t-shirts, the sweaters, even a College Football with Sam themed mug, if that's your thing, it's not that expensive. And for every Big Ten team, there is a theme. So there's a Michigan-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt, an Ohio State, Nebraska, Michigan State-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt. I encourage you to check out my merchandise store, and if you feel up to it, purchase something to show support for your school and this channel, again, via the link in the description or down below in a reply or in the pinned comment itself. Now, to get back to this topic of why I think Michigan will be successful this year, why they'll be closer to elite than just good or above average. Elite teams don't fall apart quickly. We've already covered this. And elite teams with genius head coaches, they take longer to fall apart and sometimes never fall apart. Now, I don't think Jim Harbaugh is as good of a college football head coach, certainly not as Nick Saban. In fact, there were some people who, before the Rose Bowl game was played, were trying to argue with me that Jim Harbaugh was a better head coach than Nick Saban. Now, that's just asinine. And I don't think that he's better than Urban Meyer either. I think that Saban's in a tier of his own. Urban Meyer's in a tier lower, but I don't think Jim Harbaugh and Urban are in the same stratosphere. Even Urban won 2 national titles at Florida, a national title at Ohio State, and he owned Jim Harbaugh. He did. At the peak of Urban's career, he was creating a dynasty at Florida. And at Ohio State, he ruled the Big Ten. Now, Jim Harbaugh in 2021, 2022, and 2023, I think those Michigan teams would have handled, especially the 2022 and 2023 teams, they would have handled the majority of Urban Meyer's Ohio State teams, and they would have competed with his better Florida teams. But that's just a 3-year stretch, and I feel like those years of Michigan's success had a lot to do more so with the assistants that Harbaugh hired than necessarily Jim Harbaugh himself. Ben Herbert, Sherrone Moore, Mike McDonald, Jesse Minter, for example. And there are others that you can follow as well, like Mike Hart. I think Mike Hart did wonders for Michigan's running back room. Hopefully Tony Alford can produce at the same level, and I think he will, but we'll have to see. But getting back to the topic at hand, when you have genius head coaches or head coaches that are some of the best, and an elite system that they build, which I think Harbaugh fits that category. Again, I'm not saying he's Nick Saban or Urban Meyer. I want to clarify that. But I'm saying he was one of the better head coaches in all of college football for the past 2-3 seasons. And even before that, he was still a good head coach. He just couldn't break through, a lot like James Franklin at Penn State. Ohio State in 2016 returned even less production than Michigan did entering this season. They only returned 32% of their production. They lost several NFL players, including Ezekiel Elliott, and yet they statistically improved. They got better. They did. And they weren't nearly as talented as their 2015 counterpart, which was viewed as a national championship contender for the whole year. And when they were operating at their ceiling, they certainly were. The 2016 team didn't have the same ceiling, but they were much more efficient for the given talent that they had. And I'm bringing this up because Michigan, I don't think they're going to improve statistically like Ohio State did from 15 to 16. I don't think that's going to happen. But if Ohio State from 15 to 16 and the early to middle part of Urban Meyer's tenure at Ohio State was his best, by 2000, I'd say 17 and 18, you could see that they were becoming more and more inefficient. Urban Meyer built a great system at Ohio State. And I think Michigan right now, or at least last year, past 2 years, program-wise, is near the top. They don't recruit like urban teams at Ohio State did, but they develop just as well, if not better, given the recruiting talent that they bring in, which is not top 10. They don't even have a top 10 talent roster. It's just barely top 15. And yet they've churned out NFL players. They have great college players. Their offensive lines, defensive lines know how to function together as a unit, and they're tough. They're physical, which all the great head coaches and all the great programs produce tough teams. Ohio State in 2019, again, I'm not saying Michigan will follow this example. I don't think Michigan's getting drastically better next year. That's what happened in 2019 for Ohio State. They hired a new head coach, offensive coordinator, guy who revolutionized the offense, helped that unit improve, much like Sherrone Moore did under Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. They hired him as the head coach, promoted from within when Urban Meyer retired, when he left Ohio State, and they hired several new staffers, especially on the defensive side of the football, Brian Hartline, he was promoted from the interim wide receivers role to the full-time. And Ohio State in 2019 became one of the only greatest of all-time teams that just sadly didn't win at all. And they would have destroyed Ohio State the prior year. If both of those teams were on the same field, a 2019 Ohio State wins by double digits. They probably beat most teams in college football history by double digits. That's how dominant that team was. By every power ranking metric, they were better than 2019 LSU. Not saying they would beat LSU on a neutral field, but they probably would have competed with LSU better than Clemson that year. Les Miles, he won a national championship with Saban's players, and he wasn't half the head coach that Saban was. He lived off of what Saban built at LSU for years. If you want to go even further, this is probably an example that's closer to what will happen to Michigan this year. Alabama returned 40% of their production entering 2023. They took steps back on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball from a perspective of potential and also on-field results. They still won the SEC, and they still won 12 games and were a play or two away from reaching the national championship game, and from there, potentially a game away from being one of the worst 14-1 teams of all time in the sense of power rankings and dominance. But they were well coached, they were talented, they were developed well. I mean, look at Jalen Milroe. At the beginning of the year, he looked like a total project. By the end of the year, he was much better. Still a lot of work to do, but you still had a great system. You still had great assistants, a great staff. It was even with coordinator changes and some questionable coordinator hires. You still had an awesome strength and conditioning staff. You still had that elite recruiting, which Michigan doesn't necessarily have that, but everything else that I just mentioned, Michigan does have that entering 2024. Of course, there's a head coaching change that Alabama entering 2023 didn't have, but Michigan can still be a near elite to elite team entering the season because of what Harbaugh, what he set up, what he built, the foundation that he laid, and the fact that Sherrone Moore was with Harbaugh since 2018. He has risen through the ranks, and he helped revolutionize Michigan's offense. 2022 and 2023, those Michigan offenses were the best offenses under Jim Harbaugh. I don't care if their scoring offenses technically weren't better. In 2023, for example, technically wasn't better than the 2016 scoring offense. You watch those offenses, 2023 Michigan, offensively, oftentimes all they did was just enough to win. If they played full throttle, full aggression in all of their games, could have easily scored in the lower to mid 40s points per game. It was an awesome, efficient, revolutionary, blended with tradition type offense. It was balanced, and it was beautiful. And I think that Sherrone Moore is going to be a good, great head coach. That's speculative, though. I'm not even factoring that in totally in my proposal here, in my opinion. Because on top of the great system, on top of the fact that historically national championship teams don't immediately fall back down to being unranked the following year, typically, returning star talent helps. Michigan brings back Donovan Edwards, Colston Loveland, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, and Kenneth Grant, all of whom could be first-round picks. In addition to those 5 elite players, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, Makari Page, these are great players who come back. Same with Quentin Johnson. They bring in 2 great transfers in Josh Preby and Jason Barham, and I think a player who from the FCS to the FBS level will remain great in Amir Hall. They bring in Wesley Walker from Tennessee and Louisville, who should be a great depth piece, could be a good player if he fits the system correctly and if he's developed well. Michigan's done wonderful in the secondary. At wide receiver, Samaj Morgan and Tyler Morris could be poised for a breakout year. On the offensive line, Myles Hinton. Hinton's a player who could be with those 5 elite players if he plays to his ceiling. And Andrew Gentry on the other side at tackle, he was highly recruited out of high school, older player. And Greg Crippen at center, he's had some action along with Giovanni El-Hadi and Josh Preby in Big Ten play. And Kalel Mullings has seen action now for 2 years. So there's star talent, there's role players to help the star talent, and there are players who could either be a good role player or an elite player. Michigan's great development and training has set them up for success this year. Even if you don't think Sherrone Moore's the guy and you think he's going to flame out, is this star talent really just going to get bulldozed by Texas, by Oregon, by Ohio State? Is that really going to happen? Like in all 3 of those games, Michigan just lays down and dies, or they lose all of them fairly easily. Is that what you think will happen, or is that what you want to happen? I want Michigan, because I'm a Michigan fan, to go 3-0. I don't think they will, but I do think they'll at least win one of those games, more likely than not 2 of them, because of some of the matchups, but more so because the vast star talent that Michigan has all over on defense, on some places on offense, and their reputation on the offensive line, and their body of work that they've put forth before me over the prior 3 years, which if Harbaugh stayed and Sherrone Moore wasn't promoted, for example, and he stayed on staff, there would be some people who would probably view this as potentially the beginning of a dynasty. But coaching changes, they can sometimes mess up programs. We have yet to see if Sherrone Moore is going to be the guy or not. I think he will, but it's understandable why people are questioning Michigan. It's very understandable. I don't agree with it, but when you only bring back 40% of your production, when you have a new head coach, a plethora of new starters, and a tough schedule. I mean, Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State will be unanimous top 4, top 5 teams by the major media outlets and by most power ranking systems. And that's tough. That's a lot to overcome. So what should be the expectations for Michigan this year? They have a new head coach, mostly new staff, only bring back 4 out of 10 of their production from last year. There will be regression. That's for sure. I think last year's Michigan team would beat this year's Michigan team probably by double digits. And I think the 2022 team will be better than this year's team. I would compare this team in a loose way to the 2021 Michigan team, probably with a better defense. The offense will probably have a higher ceiling, possibly, but also a lower, in fact, much lower floor. The offense, more likely than not, will be worse than even the 2021 offense was, which, when I say even worse, I'm not saying that was bad, but the defense that year was definitely better than the offense. That was clear. In 2022 and 2020, well, for parts of 2023, it was clear that the offense and defense were closer together and the team wasn't unbalanced. This could be an unbalanced team. I think losing more than 3 games, though, with all that's lost and all that's changing, is unacceptable. And I think going 9-3 would be okay, but I don't want okay. I think it would be a modest disappointment. I think going 10-2, which means you beat all the teams that Michigan will be favored against, that Michigan wins all the games they're favored in, and they get one upset, whether that's against Texas at home, Oregon at home, or Ohio State on the road, I think that's reasonable. I think a 10-2 season, Michigan with that schedule at 10-2, and 99% sure they get into the college football playoff. If they can go 10-2 and beat one of those 3 teams, there's also a good shot of them going 11-1 and beating 2 of them. 12-0, it could happen, but that's totally unfair to expect. With all that's leaving and with all the changes that have happened and the fact that this is the toughest Michigan schedule that I've seen in a long time, there has to be some drop-off, not just in overall performance, but also in the record. This team could make a playoff run. Again, they could go 12-0. I even think they could compete for the national championship. But the likelihood is they're going to be a step behind Georgia, a step behind Alabama, a step behind Ohio State, but they'll still be one of the best teams in the country and can certainly be an elite team this year. I do think Michigan will be in that top 6, top 5 potentially top 4. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for sponsoring this video and channel as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Conrad Little OH, and Ismar for sponsoring this video and channel as All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janaisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video and channel as all conference members. Check out my Patreon page and my merchandise store via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys very soon. Bye-bye.